So Brian and I are here today as a part of the PEDS table in the back there to really describe to you our personal passion and commitment to put an end to the surprise admission on units 5 and 6 at Masonic Children's Hospital. So the problem, and this might be surprising to you all, is that we had pediatric patients arriving to our units on 5 and 6 without advance notice to the resident and or nursing teams. So our aim statement was to increase the reliability of nursing and resident awareness of these admissions to 5 and 6 with the goal of having at least 30 minutes notification and to raise that percentage from 77% to 90% by the end of our project or by the end of April 2015 without having a negative impact on the great work that's being done by our colleagues that are transferring patients from the ED. We defined what was in scope by looking at the areas of where our admissions come from and focusing our efforts on the ED and unscheduled admissions. And so out of scope then were the transfers out of the ICU and our scheduled post-ops that we had advance notice on. To help get a better understanding of where our admissions were coming from and how much time notice that we were given in advance, we had a very committed and invested resident group. And I probably owe them a batch of cookies or two because they helped collect data for us from the end of August all the way through the end of October and hand collected all of this data. So on the first chart at the top of your screen, I really call this the graph of opportunity. As noted on the screen, we had kids who were arriving on our unit without any notification at all, or sitting on our unit up until 180 minutes later before the resident was even notified. So lots of area for opportunity there. And then where were these kids coming from? So where did we want to focus? So we wanted to define our focus on the areas of ED as well as the scheduled unexpected admissions to 5 and 6, because that was where the brunt of our admissions were coming from. And as you can see through this diagram, that was our current state, so multiple avenues and ways to get a child admitted into our pediatric med-surg areas, and then the future much more streamlined process flow or test of change that we would want to implement. And Brian will speak more to that.
So the biggest thing that we realized very quickly is that one of the causes of this kind of problem was that there are many, many ways to get patients into the hospital, but most of those ways were not really good ones. And so we really kind of tried to streamline the process and really highlight what are the kind of the key entry points that patients and that kind of information can be disseminated that patients are going to be coming into the hospital. And really the biggest thing is we identified is there are a couple of key pagers, especially kind of we identified an admissions pager that the residents carry, and that whenever a patient comes into the hospital, this is the pager that is supposed to be paged so that the people involved can start to know what's happening. And so we partnered with the patient placement managers, kind of a resource that I certainly didn't really know a ton about. We partnered with them to kind of really identify this pager as really the key entrance point. And so and then we kind of took that idea, took that message, and took it on the road, per se. We went to the division meetings, we went to the residents, we went to the ERs, and we kind of said, this is going to be the gold standard of how we're going to get patients into the hospital. Because once you page this pager, the system should work. And so we really tried to focus and highlight this as much as possible. We looked at also then when we're going to use that pager as kind of the key entry point, how do we then standardize the workflow of the people using that pager? So how do we make sure that the proper information is given to the people that need it? So MRNs, diagnoses, admitting provider, all the things that people need to make sure that they're doing the right things for the patient. And then once we kind of focused it on that intervention, then we started, again, the residents continued to collect data. We sent out staff surveys to see kind of our staff, both from the RN side, the resident side, kind of their impressions of how the admissions process works, other identifications of areas of improvement. And so, this is a little bit busy, but really the bottom line from this is that when we looked at the data, once we really identified those kind of key points and identified this admissions pager is really the way to go to bring patients into the hospital, we found that of our, I don't know how to make this work. of our kind of the notification time, we started at 77% notification time of greater than 30 minutes, and we were able to increase that to our goal of greater than 90%. In addition, we were able to identify, really hone in on the kind of the quote-unquote problem admissions that the residents identified, and really they kind of showed us that we still have room to kind of guide our admitting providers that to still use this pager, but we were able to really decrease the number of patients that sat on the floor. So that was one of our biggest concerns. Our initial kind of that bell curve, those patients on the left side that are really waiting for 130 minutes to 150 minutes to be seen by a provider, we really had a decrease in those patients kind of just sitting on the floor. So that was very, very positive, I think. Lessons learned, we were very fortunate to have residents kind of involved in this project actually before the QI Collaborative even started, and they are as the people that are on the front lines in so many of our different departments, they were very motivated to kind of fix the things that matter to them. And so we had great data collection engagement from the residents. We had really amazing kind of nursing staff and provider support. I think this was an example, I think, of an area where both the nurses, the residents, the faculty all could really identify as this is an issue that we can really kind of join together and work with. I think the things that we would do differently next time is staying within the scope. The data collection is, I think, a challenge in many of our groups, and it was no different kind of containing all the sheer amounts of data that Epic sometimes gives us, and then trying to continue to do kind of follow-up and feedback. I think barriers, again, were the data collection, kind of manual data collection versus automated data collection. We identified kind of surprise problems, kind of issues in terms of RN views and MD views of Epic are different in terms of how do we kind of communicate better with each other. And then I think, and then to overcome some of these, we really focused on trying to do so much of our communication face-to-face. Thank you. I'd like to thank the group, and then especially thank Kyung, who is not here. She's busy being a grandmother for the first time, but she was really, really helpful in all the work that we did. So thank you.
Thank you to our sponsors, too.
Yeah.
So is this a problem throughout the hospital in terms of on the adult end of things as well, or do you think it's unique to peds?
I can speak from the medicine side at least. As a medicine hospitalist, we have a centralized triage physician that takes in all of the calls, and that's a known provider, it's a known pager. Everybody knows if you need a medicine consult, if you need to bring a patient into the hospital, this is the person this is the pager that you call. And so I think that, I can't speak for the other service lines, but I think that that's kind of what we're hoping that this pager on the pediatric side is there was no central person, and trying to identify that and really try to, and I think that will only hopefully grow in terms of that importance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With the ER process, is there not a required nurse-to-nurse communication before the patient goes out?
So with the ER process, there actually is a handoff RN to RN, as well as a conference call from provider to provider as well, involving the resident and involving the RN. There's a best practice out there that says that we should really attempt to get our kids from the ED to the med-surg areas within 30 minutes or less. So that was their target goal, and so we wanted to help support that, even though currently, our aim is around 60 minutes from ED to med-surg. But we want to work towards that and help support them get that goal of 30 minutes as well.
So was that not happening for the unexpected from the ED, or?
Most of the unexpected admissions came out not through the emergency department actually, but were coming from home or coming from clinic, and it really was a provider wanting to bring a patient into the hospital and not really knowing the best way to do it. It was calling them and saying, you should be in the hospital, and then they would come.
And I think we borrowed from the ED to med-surg practice as really our guiding force of an area that was doing it well. Mm-hmm.
I just had a quick question related to some of the tools that you learned from the QI Collaborative. Which tools did you find most effective, or which were new to you?
They were mostly all new to me.
I'll be real honest, they were, I have some basic background in lean principles, thanks to Kyung and our work about 11 years ago in standardizing the old 5B supply room. So that was thanks to Kyung.
I think to me the thing that was really positive for me about the collaborative is it really provided kind of a space to do this work, especially seeing, the residents which basically just brought this data to us, but they didn't really have an avenue to really utilize or kind of focus this data, and I think that's what the QI Collaborative allowed us to do. Thank you.
Thank you.